The lights in the studio were warm, polished, and professional, designed to make both the guests and the audience feel comfortable. But comfort was the last thing on Marcus Reed's mind. He sat in the sleek, modern chair at the center of the morning exchange set, his posture relaxed, but his mind sharp. Across from him sat Emma Langford, a media powerhouse known for her razor-sharp interviews and her ability to twist a conversation in her favor. She had taken down politicians, exposed Hollywood scandals, and cornered CEOs who walked in thinking they were getting a friendly PR moment. This wasn't his first time in front of the cameras, but today was different. Marcus had built Vertex Innovations from nothing, turning a small AI startup into one of the most influential tech companies in the world. His company's AI systems were used in hospitals, law enforcement, and financial markets. His technology had changed industries, disrupted old institutions, and forced outdated systems to evolve. Yet despite all of that, the undercurrent of this interview wasn't really about his technology. It wasn't about his leadership or innovation. It was about him, a black CEO in an industry that had been, for decades, an exclusive club for white men. And that fact alone made him a target. The audience murmured softly as the countdown to live broadcast began. A mix of executives, industry insiders, and morning coffee drinkers who tuned in for their daily dose of headlines and controversy. Some were here to hear about the future of AI. Others? They wanted to see if Marcus would crack under pressure. The red light on the camera blinked. Showtime. Emma turned to the camera with her signature polished smile. Good morning, everyone. Today we have a fascinating conversation ahead. Our guest is a man who has built one of the most innovative tech companies of our time, shaping the way we interact with artificial intelligence. But with power comes responsibility and controversy. She pivoted to Marcus, her smile unwavering. Mr. Reed, thank you for being here. Marcus gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. Appreciate the invitation. Emma leaned in just a fraction, her body language subtle but deliberate. You've had an impressive rise, one that many have called unprecedented. A lot of people look at your success and wonder, is this a testament to merit, or is it the result of a system trying to correct past injustices? The air in the room shifted. It was so slight, so quick, but it was there. The words were a trap. Not a question, but a test, a challenge. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose, already recognizing the game she was playing. But what Emma Langford didn't know. Marcus Reed had already won before she even started. The audience? They weren't ready for what was about to happen next. The silence stretched for just a second too long. It was deliberate, intentional. Emma Langford had crafted her words carefully, a seasoned interviewer who knew how to push just hard enough to make her guest uncomfortable. But Marcus Reed was not an easy man to shake. He studied her, his face unreadable, his posture still relaxed. The room felt heavier now, like everyone both in the studio and watching from home was holding their breath. Then, finally, he spoke. That's an interesting way to phrase it, Marcus said, his voice smooth, controlled. Are you asking if I earned my success or if it was handed to me? Emma gave a practiced laugh, the kind designed to make the other person seem ridiculous for even suggesting such a thing. Oh, not at all, Marcus, she said, tilting her head slightly, maintaining her poised authority. I'm simply saying that we live in a time where companies are prioritizing diversity initiatives. And of course that's a good thing, but some people, our viewers included, might wonder if programs like these tilt the playing field in a way that benefits some more than others. The tension in the room thickened. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Some shifted in their seats. It was subtle, but Marcus caught it. This wasn't just an interview, it was a test, a challenge, a carefully laid trap, wrapped in polite words and false neutrality, and he had no intention of stepping into it. Marcus leaned forward just slightly, the movement controlled, precise. just enough to let the audience know he was fully engaged now. "Let's break that down," he said, his voice steady. "You're suggesting that companies making an effort to include historically excluded talent somehow erases merit. But if that were true, why is it that when I walk into a room full of executives, I'm still the only one who looks like me?" The words landed like a hammer. For the first time, Emma's composure wavered. Just slightly, barely noticeable, but it was there. She straightened in her seat. "Well, it's a complicated issue," she started. Marcus didn't let her finish. "Is it?" he asked, his tone still measured. "Because it sounds pretty simple to me. What's actually happening is that, for the first time, people who have always been qualified are finally getting their shot. But when someone like me rises to the top, people don't ask how many hours I worked, how many sacrifices I made, how many nights I spent building something from the ground up. Instead, they ask, 'Did the system give you a handout?'" A single clap echoed from somewhere in the audience before it was quickly stifled. Emma's smile tightened. The studio air felt charged now, almost electric. She had planned to control this conversation, but it was becoming clear she was no longer the one holding the reins. For a moment, Emma Langford didn't respond. She had been here before, interviewing high-powered figures, pressing them, watching them squirm. But this wasn't the reaction she expected. Marcus Reed wasn't squirming. He was completely unbothered. The silence stretched long enough for the tension to settle thick in the air. The audience could feel it. Viewers at home could feel it. It was the kind of moment where people leaned in just a little closer, waiting to see what would happen next. Emma recovered quickly. She gave a slight shake of her head, as if amused by the exchange, and let out a soft chuckle. "Marcus, let's be clear, no one is questioning your intelligence or your talent. You built something remarkable. But in this country, we do have to acknowledge that diversity hiring initiatives have changed the way businesses operate. And some would argue that while the intention is good, it sometimes results in less qualified individuals being elevated over those who may have been better suited for the role. Do you see how that could be a concern?" There it was. She wasn't hiding it anymore. The shift was subtle but undeniable. The question was no longer veiled in politeness. It was direct, pointed, and, most importantly, it wasn't about his company anymore. It was about him. Marcus exhaled quietly, not out of frustration, but with the kind of patience that comes from years of hearing the same thing over and over again from people who thought they were saying something groundbreaking. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying her. "I see exactly what you're saying," he said, nodding once. "But let me ask you this. When was the last time someone sat across from a white CEO and asked if they really deserved their position?" The room reacted before Emma could. A few audience members shifted, someone cleared their throat. The atmosphere changed, becoming heavier, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Emma's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Marcus didn't let the silence linger for too long. Where was the last time a Fortune 500 company hired an average white man and someone turned around and said, "Maybe he didn't earn it. Maybe he's just here because the system helps people like him"? Emma opened her mouth again, but this time Marcus leaned forward just slightly, his voice calm, measured. "Because if we're going to talk about unearned opportunities, let's be honest about where that conversation really belongs." The words hung in the air, heavy and immovable. For the first time, Emma Langford, polished, professional, always in control, looked like she was searching for an answer. And for the first time, the audience wasn't just watching, they were witnessing something. For the first time, Emma Langford's confidence wavered, just for a second, but enough for the cameras to catch. Marcus Reed had turned the conversation into something she didn't anticipate. He wasn't reacting defensively. He wasn't scrambling for words. He was controlling the room, and she knew it. Emma inhaled slightly, shifting in her seat. She wasn't out yet, but she needed to regain control, and fast. So she made a mistake. A fatal one. She forced a small chuckle, shaking her head slightly as if the exchange had been nothing more than a friendly intellectual debate. "Well," she said, her tone cooling just a bit, "I think some people might argue that in industries like yours, Marcus, companies do lower the bar to meet certain expectations." The shift in the room was immediate. A low murmur rippled through the audience, not loud, but unmistakable, the kind of moment where people at home paused, fingers hovering over their phones, recognizing that a line had just been crossed. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply looked at her, studied her, the way a chess player studies the board before making a move that changes the entire game. Then he leaned forward, resting his hands on his knee, and said calmly, "If you think the bar has been lowered, then let's raise it. Right here, right now." The camera zoomed in. The air in the studio had shifted from tension to something sharper, more electric. Emma's fingers twitched slightly over the cue cards in front of her, but she kept her smile, though it was thinner now. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Go ahead, Emma. Ask me anything. Ask me about my company, my innovations, the technology we've developed. Test me. Let's see if the bar has truly been lowered." Emma hesitated. She had lost the advantage, and she knew it. Because this wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about every viewer watching, every person who had ever been underestimated, questioned, or made to prove themselves twice as hard just to get half as far. And at this moment, the audience wasn't just watching an interview. They were watching a reckoning. The silence in the studio was suffocating. Marcus Reed had just flipped the entire conversation, and now the weight of his challenge hung heavy in the air. The tension wasn't just something the audience could feel, it was something they could almost see, crackling like static between him and Emma Langford. She had walked into this interview expecting to control the narrative, but now she was the one being measured, scrutinized, and, for the first time, doubted. She cleared her throat, attempting to regain her footing. "Marcus, I think we're getting a little off track here." "Are we?" Marcus cut in smoothly. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried more weight than if he had shouted, "because it seems to me that we're finally on the right track." Emma blinked. The audience was no longer passive. They were shifting, leaning in, eyes darting between the two figures at the center of the stage. This was no longer just an interview. It was a moment. The kind of moment that, in real time, people knew they'd be talking about long after the cameras stopped rolling. Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely unbothered. "Let's talk about lowering the bar, Emma." His tone was calm, measured, but there was an edge to it. "You said some people believe diversity initiatives result in less qualified individuals being elevated, so let's test that theory." The air in the room thickened. Right now there are exactly 6 black CEOs in the Fortune 500. 6 out of 500. He let it sit for a second, let the number sink into the minds of everyone listening. If the system were truly lowering the bar to make room for people like me, don't you think that number would be a little different? The murmur in the audience grew louder. Emma was struggling now, but she refused to go down without a fight. "Marcus, I think you're making some broad generalizations." "Am I?" Marcus interrupted again, his voice never losing its even tone. "Because here's the reality. When a white man gets promoted, no one asks if he truly earned it. No one assumes he was placed there because of a system designed to favor him. It's just expected." Emma inhaled sharply. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her. Marcus wasn't just answering questions anymore. He was rewriting the entire conversation. And in doing so, he wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing the double standard that had been operating in plain sight for decades. For the first time in her career, Emma Langford had no words. The audience wasn't just watching. They were witnessing a reckoning. The moment the interview ended, Emma Langford didn't linger. Her smile was tight, her nod curt, and as soon as the cameras cut to commercial, she turned away without another word. Marcus Reed, on the other hand, took his time. He stood, adjusted his suit, and shook hands with the producers and crew members, offering polite nods, as if the past 30 minutes hadn't just sent shockwaves through the studio. But something had happened. Something irreversible. By the time Marcus stepped off set and into the hallway, his phone was already vibrating. Over and over, calls, texts, notifications pouring in. His assistant, James, was waiting just outside the green room, eyes wide. "You've seen it already?" Marcus asked, barely amused. James didn't even have to say anything. He just turned his phone around. It was everywhere. Social media had exploded before the interview even finished airing. Clips were spreading at lightning speed. Twitter was in a frenzy. Marcus Reed was trending worldwide. Right beneath it, Emma exposed and "raise the bar," the phrase Marcus had used in his takedown, now being turned into a viral rallying cry. He scrolled through the chaos. A viral tweet. Emma Langford just found out in real time that some men come prepared for the ambush. Marcus Reed, absolute masterclass. A YouTube clip caption. "This is what happens when you try to challenge a CEO who built his empire from the ground up. Watch until the end. She had nothing left." The counterattacks. A headline from a certain network. Did Marcus Reed bully a female host on live TV? Debate or public shaming? Marcus exhaled through his nose. Predictable. James shook his head, still scrolling. Emma's team is in full damage control mode. They're saying she was just asking tough questions and you overreacted. Marcus chuckled lowly, tucking his phone into his pocket. Of course they are. But the world had already made up its mind. That night, the Morning Exchange uploaded the full, unedited interview. No spin, no clipped highlights, just the raw footage. Within 2 hours, it was the #1 trending video on YouTube. By morning, it had 12 million views. Corporate America was watching. Media executives were watching. And, for the first time, Emma Langford was the one under scrutiny. The fallout was swift. By the next morning, every major news outlet was covering the interview. Headlines ranged from neutral analyses to outright damage control attempts. A masterclass in handling loaded questions. How Marcus Reed changed the conversation. The end of Emma Langford, the Morning Exchange, faces unprecedented backlash. Did Marcus Reed just expose corporate America's biggest double standard? Emma Langford's team scrambled to contain the damage. Statements were released insisting that she had simply been asking the tough questions, and that the interview had been taken out of context. But no one was buying it. Clips of her expression shifting, her thin smile faltering, and Marcus's razor-sharp responses were now etched into the internet's memory. Replayed, analyzed, discussed. Even more damning? Some of the Morning Exchange's biggest sponsors were quietly re-evaluating their partnerships. Emma herself, she remained silent. But silence in this case was louder than any statement she could have made. Meanwhile, Marcus Reed was experiencing a very different reality. His inbox was overflowing, not just with praise, but with opportunities. Speaking engagements, business magazine features, invitations from top networks, not for another interrogation, but for discussions on leadership, innovation, and the shifting corporate landscape. Marcus had walked into that interview as a CEO. He walked out of it as a symbol. Not because he had planned it, not because he had wanted it, but because he had exposed something people weren't willing to ignore anymore. And now, they were listening. The next week, Marcus sat across from a different host, one who wasn't there to trap him, but to learn. "Marcus, after everything that's happened, what's next for you?" He smiled, thoughtful. "The same thing I was doing before." He leaned forward. "Building, creating, leading, and making sure that the next time someone like me walks into a room, no one questions whether they deserve to be there." This time the applause wasn't just polite. It was a statement. A new conversation had begun, and Marcus Reed had made sure no one could ignore it. Marcus Reed didn't walk into the morning exchange expecting a battle, but he was prepared for one. He knew the rules of the game, the unspoken biases, and the expectations that came with being one of the few black CEOs in his industry. But instead of playing defense, he took control. He didn't just answer the questions, he exposed them. He didn't just push back, he flipped the conversation entirely. And in doing so, he didn't just defend himself. He spoke for every person who had ever been underestimated. For every professional who had walked into a room and felt like they had to prove themselves twice as hard just to get half as far. For every leader who had been asked if they deserved their seat at the table, while others sat comfortably without ever being questioned. Marcus's story isn't just about one interview. It's about how narratives are shaped, how the media frames conversations, how corporate structures uphold invisible barriers, and most importantly, it's about what happens when someone refuses to play along. The key takeaways. Confidence is power. Marcus didn't let emotions take over. He stayed in control. Know your worth. He refused to let someone else define his success. Challenge the system. He didn't just defend himself, he turned the mirror on the industry itself. The truth speaks for itself. The world saw what happened and no amount of spin could change that. And here's the most important lesson. When you know your value, no one can take it away from you. What do you think? Let's talk. Do you think Marcus handled the situation the right way? Have you ever been in a position where you had to prove yourself more than others? How do we change the conversation around success and merit? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's have this conversation together. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shape culture, media, and power. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.